In a previous video, we made a procedural generator for planets. By doing a rough tectonic simulation and layering on some fractal noise, we were able to model worlds that look fairly Earth-like. In this video, we're going to take those worlds and do a simulation of the history that happens on them, specifically trying to simulate the real-life factors that contribute to the rise and fall of empires. Now, I'm saying that kind of casually, but let's just do a realistic simulation of imperial dynamics is not a simple thing. Like, generally, when you're trying to do a simulation, you learn about how the real thing works, and then you simplify it down to a point where, in some level, it's still representing that, so you can have some meaningful conclusions, but it's no longer as computationally complex as the real-life thing is. As an example, a number of years ago, I made a deformable body simulation. And instead of trying to model everything that happens in physics, I just decided to model Hooke's law and a simplified version of momentum. Obviously, this isn't accurate to how cows move, but it does tell us something about how we think physics works. The problem is, unlike physics, there's not a consensus around the math behind how history works. I can get lots of books on why certain events happened the way they did, but these are way more detailed than is helpful for us. It's like learning about how individual atoms move when we're trying to model car crashes. Now, there are other books that gloss over the details and try to give the big underlying forces that affect all of history, but these all have different conclusions. There's no equivalent of someone like Isaac Newton who sets up the most basic rules that everyone agrees are true. And in fact, most of the popular books of this genre have other books that are specifically written to try to debunk every point they're making. I mean, Tolstoy was even doing this back in 1869. All that to say, historical dynamics is very much a soft science. So if we're going to try to do a computer simulation of it, we're going to need to define our goals pretty narrowly. And to do that, I'm going to use 3 criteria for determining whether I want to use a model or not. First of all, I want to use a model that's pretty simple. It's always easy to add more complexity later, but you can't always simplify away from the core model if it starts complicated. Ideally, it's a model that I can also find support in from a number of different authors thinking independently. The more we can move from this is some guy's opinion to this is a consensus of academics, the better. And finally, at the end of the day, I'm making this for a YouTube video. So I want to be able to model it visually on the map well, and also to be able to use it to talk about some interesting ideas. This is by no means stuff that I'm an expert in, so if you know of any models or ideas that fit this well, let me know in the comments. But the best I've found so far is Peter Turchin's model of collective solidarity. He talks about this at length in his book War and Peace and War, and also does a more mathematical description in his book Historical Dynamics. The gist of the theory is that empires are limited by how well their constituents are able to work together at scale. An empire whose members are willing to give up their own interests to prioritize the good of the empire is able to expand and grow and prosper, whereas an empire where everyone within it is acting selfishly and undercutting the public good is going to gradually decay and fall. This capacity for coordinated collective action, or collective solidarity, is a property of a culture that can increase or decrease over time. And in his meta-ethnic frontier theory, Turchin postulates that the main driver of this is internal or external conflict. Empires that face a lot of pressure from the outside will see their collective solidarity increase, whereas empires without that will see it decrease as internal fighting takes precedent. Now, obviously, he takes multiple books to explain and justify this theory and give a lot of nuance to it, whereas I spent under a minute explaining it here. So I really recommend you read these books if you want to know more about that. But I think it generally passes criteria 1 of being a pretty simple theory on a bare bones level. As for criteria 3, I think it's pretty obvious how we can apply this to the map. We already have a grid of tiles that represent different chunks of land, and we can group them together into different empires that are facing off against each other. Then, within both empires, each tile can store a value for how much collective solidarity the people there feel, and we can have that value increase if it's bordering another empire, and decrease if it's not. I'll have a percentage chance to increase and a percentage chance to decrease, just so the simulation maintains some level of unpredictability we would expect when modeling history. To make empires grow and shrink, I'll have them fight against each other each time step. They can calculate how strong they are by summing up the collective solidarity of all their constituent tiles, and then having that scale based on how far away this is to the center of the empire. This bit is a little less directly related to the theory, but if you don't do it, empires just scale infinitely and take over the entire map. So we calculate that for both empires, and whichever one's stronger takes a piece of territory. And that's it. I programmed all those rules into the map we had before, and here you can see the results. Now I can, and have, just run this simulation for hours, but let's try to zoom in and look at one particular empire's story to see the mechanics of how this model works. So in this run in the simulation, we eventually get to this situation, with this dark blue empire bordering this tan empire on a peninsula. The light gray at the end of the peninsula represents land that no empire controls, but it can still have its collective solidarity increase by being next to an empire. When it becomes high enough, that neutral tile may be able to successfully conquer land from a big empire and form its own empire. And that's what happens here. The collective solidarity values at the edge of this peninsula aren't that high, but because we're so far away from the center of the empires here, this new Cyan Empire can quickly gain territory. The neighboring Tan Empire had been losing solidarity for a while now, so our new Cyan Empire is able to quickly gobble up all their land. We eventually reach a point where the Tan Empire has barely any solidarity in any of its tiles, so the simulation removes it from the map entirely. These purple and red successor states pop out in regions of the former Tan Empire that still had some sense of solidarity remaining. Running the simulation forward a bit, we see the borders between our Cyan Empire and the Green Empire are similar to where the old Tan Empire borders were. So the tiles in that region, having been on the border of two major empires for hundreds of years at this point, all have some of the highest collective solidarity in the world. Because of this, if the Purple Empire, which is much closer to this region, is able to capture any tiles, it can quickly snowball into massive territory growth. Every tile it takes adds a large amount of solidarity to itself and removes a large amount from Cyan and Green. And that's the general behavior you're going to see a lot with this model. You get these big swings because the territory on the borders is much more valuable than core territory. Running this particular simulation forward, we see Cyan take territory back and then lose it again. Ultimately, purple collapses and a green successor state shows up. And when this one conquers Cyan territory, the core peninsula has so little solidarity remaining that the Cyan Empire collapses forever. Alright. So, to me, this strongly checks the box on criteria 3 as being a model that visualizes well. But what about criteria 2? Is there work outside of Turchin that supports this idea? First, we have the Mukaddima, where the nomadic Bedouin tribes and the settled civilizations are described as getting more cohesive and able to work together through conflict with each other and opposition. And this is actually where the term group solidarity comes from, although my English translation has it as group feeling, which feels kind of less descriptive. And the Arabic word is asibaya, something like that. It's this word, which has some non-English sounds. Okay, hold on. Okay, scroll on down here. Here we go. We got a voiced pharyngeal fricative. So like I'm like rolling it. It's not trill. It's and then what was dot s with a dot? The emphatic, voiceless, stenty-alveolar fricative. Emphatic consonants are pronounced at the back of the tongue, approaching the pharynx. Okay, this is only in Semitic languages. Okay, great. How do I do that? So, Rosobia? Rosobia? Okay, I mean, just being straight with you, I've spent 6 years practicing Japanese and people still complain about my pronunciation. We're not going to get Arabic in 10 minutes, but that's the idea. This word. Anyways, what were we talking about again? Oh, right, the support for the theory of collective solidarity. Francis Fukuyama has a lot of synergistic ideas in his economic book Trust, and Pete Buttigieg has similar ideas in his political book that is also called Trust. Robert Putnam has done a lot of work on the connection between civic engagement and the capacity for society to do things at a large scale, both looking at trends in Italy and the United States. And a lot of books about more specific periods in history can have a lot of echoes of these ideas in specifically showing how collective solidarity can rise or fall. What I think is hardest to find support for is the idea that collective solidarity increases on the border of empires and decreases on the insides. Like, the book Sapiens has some ideas that are similar to collective solidarity, but Harari associates it more with stuff like religions and ideologies that get people to coordinate at scale. To get support for imperial conflict being the driver here, I think it's helpful to phrase what we're looking for more generically. So far, we've been looking for the thing that causes people to work together better at scale. But if instead we phrase that as what's the thing that makes animals work together at scale, we can start bringing in biology concepts here. There's a really wide amount of literature and theories available for why bird flocks, wolf packs, or ant colonies are able to evolve to work together. And while it's obviously happening at a very different scale, I think we can apply a lot of those ideas to what we're thinking about with empires. The YouTuber Primer has a lot of good videos on this kind of stuff, and seeing as I'm stealing his title format for this video, I feel kind of obligated to call him out here. But the theory I want to talk about today, I think, works really well for generalizing to human societies, and that's group selection, or multi-level selection. The idea here is that we have a collection of creatures that can team up into different bands or groups. These groups then compete against each other. This could be something direct, like fighting each other, or something less direct, like competing over a limited pool of resources. But within these groups, different individuals will have different strategies. Some will prioritize working together, and will make sacrifices in order to ensure that the group manages to survive its conflicts with other groups well. Other individuals will be selfish, and prioritize their own needs. They won't contribute anything to the group conflict, and instead hope to freeload on victories that the other members provide. This is something like the kid in school who doesn't contribute at all to the group project and just hopes everyone else gets a good grade without them. Here I'm representing the selfish individuals as these gray alpacas, and the ones that want to work together as these more yellow llamas. We're doing that because that was the asset pack I had on my computer. But in real life, it would be something like a different expression of a gene within a same species, or whatever the cultural equivalent would be for humans. I think they used to call that a meme before that word changed what it meant. But anyways, in my simulation, we go through 3 different phases. First of all, we start with mutation. Each individual has a random chance of flipping whether they're cooperative or selfish. Then in the second phase, we have internal conflict. Because they've saved their resources for themselves, the selfish individuals are able to outcompete the cooperative ones at this stage. I'm doing a really fuzzy approximation of reproduction here, where I just take the ratio of the selfish individuals to the non-selfish ones, and use that as the probability for the new individuals being selfish. Then, for our final phase, we have different groups competing against each other. Here, I randomly shuffled groups up, and then count the number of cooperators that each group has. Whichever has more wins the competition, and the loser has their population totally replaced. Each animal has a chance of becoming a cooperator or not, based on the ratio of the winning group. By running the simulation with a large population, and tracking the average numbers of cooperators in a group, we can see that it gradually trends down. You can actually predict this mathematically with something called the price equation, and it's dependent on how much selective pressure there is from the internal competition versus how much selective pressure there is from the external competition. If I modify my simulation by having twice as much external competition, you can see the amount of cooperators trends upwards over time, whereas if I double the amount of internal competition, you can see they die out even faster. I'm being sort of intentionally hand-wavy about how things like reproduction work in this model, because that's going to be really different depending on what you're looking at, and especially when we're going to human culture. The mechanics of how I change my worldview is very different from the mechanics of how a llama reproduces. But the fact that we get some results that are similar to the idea we're trying to build with collective solidarity in this really simple model gives credence to the idea that, in some form or another, these mechanics are at play in the more complicated situation. So let's try to explicitly model group competition like this in our planet simulation. Now, instead of solidarity arbitrarily increasing on the border and decreasing everywhere else, we can just have it randomly mutate, and then use selective pressure to have it increase or decrease. Tiles can just randomly pick a neighbor and fight with it. If the neighbor is in their same country, it's an internal conflict, where the lower your collective solidarity is, the better you do. And if the tile is from another empire, it's an external conflict, where we use the same process before to sum up the collective solidarity of the whole empire to determine fighting strength. Whenever a tile wins a conflict, it copies some percentage of its collective solidarity onto that new tile. So that means for internal conflict, low ultrasociality values will get copied around, and external conflict will have high values copied. Putting all those rules into our simulation, we get the results I'm showing you now. Some minor notes while we're watching this. Both this and the older simulation start with one empire to kickstart things, and in this one that empire conquers all available land that's connected to where it starts to. And that's happening because in this model, when a tile is conquered, it takes the collective solidarity value of the tile that conquered it, whereas in the old model, it would just start with 0 and gradually increase if it was on a border. This makes the initial empire really massive, but then once it breaks down into smaller empires, the distance rule starts kicking in for conflict and it doesn't matter as much. If we build onto this model further, I'd probably add some more stuff to fix it, but I think it just complicates things more than we need for now, so I left it in. Also, this model still somewhat has the property that tiles on the edge of an empire will have a higher collective solidarity than ones on the inside, but it's more random in this model because it's just a result of the difference between the perimeter and the area of a shape. Like there's more tiles on the inside to internally compete, so it's less likely the ones on the outside will do it, but it's all kicked off from initial random mutations, so it could happen anywhere. I think an interesting point of difference between the models is the stability of empires. So like in this one, you can see basically no empire survives very long, and that's because the only way to increase your collective solidarity is to randomly evolve a higher value and then conquer from that point, which is a lot easier to do if your empire collapses and you're a successor state. On the flip side, I think the old model was overly stable, like especially if you have a map with strong choke points like we have here, you can get the situation where the tiles on the edge reach the max value of collective solidarity and all the other tiles reach the minimum value, and if that ratio is above the threshold for collapse, there's no chance that empire will ever change. I think real life is somewhere in between these two. Like, you do have situations like the Roman Empire or China where it's still kind of the same empire after thousands of years, but usually we're kind of retroactively calling it the same thing. Like, you could argue that the Roman Republic was functionally a different polity than the Roman Empire, and that Caesar's empire was functionally a different polity than Diocletian's empire. In the same way, it's pretty easy to argue that the Han Dynasty and the Ming Dynasty were functionally totally different empires that took up the same geographic space. Trying to model that involves like a whole narrative system, which would be fun to work on, but definitely is beyond the scope of what we're doing right now. An issue that you see in both models is this ability of empires to kind of just shift over terrain. And generally, that's not a thing you see with big empires.
Except for, wait for it, the Mongols.
And I guess also like the Hungarians and other people from the steppe. And I guess kind of Rome, but that was more like they grew and then shrank in the other direction. But anyways, one thing we could work on to fix this kind of thing is add a model of culture or language. And if you've watched previous videos from this channel, you'll know that's very much up the alley of things I would like to work on. I even had this linguistics book recommended by a viewer, which I always appreciate. A large portion of Turchin's work that we didn't cover here deals with population dynamics and how that feeds into the collective solidarity we talked about. I've already been working on the animation work to explain that, so a video on that will definitely be coming at some point. But if you want to read ahead, a lot of it's based on the theories created by Jack Goldstone. This book also has like a 85-page bibliography, so no shortage of things if you want to learn more about this stuff. If you want to see longer runs of this simulation, I'm posting a 40-minute long supplemental video that's just it unedited running for a while. And if you want to try messing around with the parameters yourself and running it locally, you can download the models on Patreon. My book recommendation for this video is going to be The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, which seems kind of unrelated to what we're talking about until you open up the bibliography and go, oh, hey, there's Pinker. We talked about him in this video. And oh, hey, there's Price. He was the guy who did the math for group selection. And oh, he's referencing Putnam too. That also came up for us. All that to say, while we're talking about a lot of these ideas in the context of making a fun little animation on YouTube, this is all important stuff that you can go and apply to very real, serious conversations. And I'll leave you with that. Here's a video of me playing guitar because someone suggested I use AI-generated music for my videos, and I was annoyed, so you get me sloppily playing some guitar instead. Hopefully see some of you at the next video, which will probably be a totally unrelated topic to this.